My name is Annie Simpson. I'm the Associate Director of Troost ILead. I'm joined here today by Milan Maljkovic and Natalia Smith, who are here as fabulous ILead team collaborators. So for those of you who are not familiar with Troost ILead, just a little bit of an overview. We are a fairly large leadership institute. We're quite a unique feature of U of T. We offer many programs and academic courses that are all designed to support you in your leadership development at the personal level, at the interpersonal level, and at the professional level. So we offer quite a lot, and I would really encourage all of you to check out our website, Troost ILead, and join our newsletter if you are not already receiving that. A word about the career talks. This is a new series for us, and there's a few goals that we have in mind as we move through this series. What we really want to do is support all of you to get a sense of what's it really like to be an engineer in this vast variety of fields that our graduates tend to go in. So we want to give you that sense of, what's it really like? What are the highs? What are the lows? What are the unexpected things that people discover once they move into these various career fields? So today we have three incredible U of T alum who are also very connected to ILead, who I will introduce in just a moment, and they will be talking about social impact, most specifically as it relates to finance and investment today. Another goal of this program, apart from understanding what it's really like, is to give you a chance to do some self-reflection. We know that many of you are reflecting on your future career. Where am I going? What do I want to be when I grow up? What kind of choices are you making at this time? So we've integrated a little bit of a piece that just allows you to take what you're learning and do a tiny bit of journaling, just to really sort of integrate this into your life and what it means to you personally. And then finally, the other goal that we have in mind is some community connection. We know that many of us are living in very strange times. The pandemic is quite isolating. Some of you are really longing for more connection. So we do want to also create those opportunities, and there will be one opportunity as we move through the call. Okay, so to set up your view, just so we know, or just so that you are set up for your best experience, there are choices, but we would suggest that you choose speaker view. So if you go to the top of your screen and go to view options, you can choose side by side, which will allow you to both see the PowerPoint slides, but also see the four people who are speaking. So that would be a suggestion. Okay, great. So a couple of event norms. We want to ask everyone to leave your microphones on mute during the panel. We also want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. So if you'd like to keep your camera off, you're more welcome, most welcome. We just want to make sure everybody's comfortable. And finally, we really encourage you to use the chat. So there will be an opportunity towards the end of the session for you to have your questions answered. There'll be a Q&A period. There's nothing stopping you from putting your questions in earlier. So any questions that you have, and I know there were some excellent questions submitted by all of you when you registered for the session, please feel free to load up those questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to them towards the end of the session. Okay. So before we begin, something that we often do when we are on the U of T campus is a land acknowledgement. And we wanted to continue this, even though I know we are working in various geographic regions and calling in from lots of different places. It feels very important, given the growing awareness and acknowledgement of incredible systemic inequality that exists, that we acknowledge the land that many of us are on, and certainly in North America. So I want to read this acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississauga of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As an institute that supports inclusive leadership, we want to encourage you to lean into learning about the Indigenous history of the area that you live in, and there's a really helpful and wonderful link that Milan will put in the chat called Native Land. And those of you who are in North America can hover over where you live and learn more about the Indigenous history of where it is that you live. So just want to encourage that learning, to lean into that learning as we are engineers leading change to build a better world. Okay, thank you. So our agenda today, we are moving through some logistical elements here, and I'm about to introduce our fantastic panelists. We'll have about 15 minutes for some first questions. We'll have an opportunity for a little bit of community connection where you can integrate what you're hearing. We'll have another part to the panel. We'll have some individual reflection, and then we'll have our Q&A. So I wanted to give everyone a sense of kind of the arc that we're following here. I also wanted to say, as I mentioned, that our panelists are all working in social impact, and they're all working in social impact really from a finance and investment perspective. So we're really excited to dig into that. Also want to acknowledge there's many ways to have social impact, and maybe there will be other opportunities where we explore other pathways within this broader space. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And I'm going to start with Sandra Odendahl. Sandra Odendahl is Vice President, Social Impact and Sustainability at Scotiabank. She brings over 20 years of experience in environmental science, engineering, and responsible finance. Her previous executive positions include President and CEO of CMC Research Institutes, an environmental tech and innovation company that facilitates the testing and scale-up of technologies that reduce carbon emissions from industrial sources. She also headed the Royal Bank of Canada's Corporate Sustainability, Social Finance, and Social Innovations team. Sandra is an alum, a ChemE alum of U of T, and has been a committed member of the Troost ILead board. And Sandra, I just would love to hear a hello, and where are you calling in from?
Here, unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. Hello, hi, thanks for that intro. So I'm calling in from my dining room in Midtown Toronto.
Excellent. Okay, welcome, Sandra. All right, so our second panelist is Mina Shahid, and Mina is the co-founder and CEO of Numida, a fintech social enterprise based in Kampala, Uganda. Numida provides convenient and unsecured working capital loans to financially excluded and semi-formal micro and small businesses. I was just on the Numida website and saw something that was quite astounding, which was a statement saying that Numida is unlocking the potential of 22 million small businesses by showing them the power of their data. There's lots more to say about Mina, as there is about all of our panelists, but I wanted to also mention that while Mina was at school, he was at engineering school, he was the president of the EWB U of T chapter and played various leadership roles on campus. He graduated as a Mech Eng, OT9 plus PEY. Welcome, Mina. Where are you calling in from?
Hey, Annie. I'm calling in from Kampala right now, so greetings to everybody from the motherland.
Amazing. Okay, thank you for being here. And finally, we have Jason Sukhram. Jason Sukhram is a manager with the Mars Discovery District Center for Impact Investing, whose mission is to support stakeholders to leverage private capital for social good. While working to help organizations quantify and manage their social and environmental impact, he has also developed a new social investment opportunity, including a social impact bond to keep Indigenous children out of the care system in Manitoba. Jason has worked for the Clinton Foundation in their poverty alleviation initiative. As a student, Jason was a highly active student leader. He was a member of the ILead student staff team, and he is also a member of the Troost ILead board. So welcome, Jason, and where are you calling in from?
Thanks so much for the intro, Annie, and I'm here based in Toronto out of my bedroom.
On campus.
Yeah.
Great, okay, welcome. So jumping into our questions here, the first question is for Jason and for Mina, and we're just kind of framing the discussion here as we drill a little bit deeper. So Jason, starting with you, how do you understand social impact and what distinguishes that for you?
Thanks, Annie. It's a great question, one that we actually get very often in our line of work with various stakeholders trying to understand what we're trying to do in terms of defining impact, measuring it, and managing it. For us, and I guess personally for me, what I define social impact that is an improvement in the social outcomes for people, or an improvement in the environmental outcomes for the planet. I think those are pretty broad categories, and a lot of things fit within it. But ultimately, what we're trying to do when we're trying to achieve some sort of social impact is to try to make the world better and for people and for the planet. And the way that we sort of really distinguish that is in a measurable way, a measurable outcome, something that's indicative of, you know, a broader theory of change, something that's indicative of saying, you know, if we're ultimately trying to improve the planet, what are the things that we can point to? What are the metrics and the indicators that we can point to that tell us that we've done that? Is that reducing the CO2 emissions in the atmosphere? Is that improving the quality of water? Is that improving the mental health of a population, or their access to services and opportunities? These are really the ways that we try to define social impact in our work, and help sort of various stakeholders, and even for those on the call, move from in the direction towards really what's that measurable and the intention behind trying to improve the world and for the planet and for people.
Okay, fantastic, amazing. And Mina, I wonder if you have anything to add to that. How do you understand social impact, and what distinguishes it for you?
Yeah, I think Jason hit on most of the pieces there. The only thing I would add is the way I think about it is initiatives that are fundamentally changing systems that are keeping people poor. So the concept of systemic change has to be embedded in the work. And the reason, yeah, I mean, like for us, for example, we think about how are our products and services like fundamentally reducing vulnerability for our customers, and challenging the systems that have maintained poverty, for example. So that's the only thing I would add.
Okay, amazing. So improving people's lives, the planet, addressing those systems, and having some measures and accountability in place to be able to see that the work is moving the needle in important ways. Okay, thank you. Sandra, I'm going to start with Sandra, and then I'm going to come back to you, Mina. Question for you. As we're talking about social impact and what drew all of you into this space of trying to improve the world for people, for the planet, address these systemic challenges and inequities that exist. Sandra, if you were to drill down to the very heart of it, what's the impact or the difference that you are trying to make?
Thanks for the question. I guess the impact that I want to make overall is I've always wanted to see business activity used to drive positive environmental and social change. I think that particularly coming from an engineering background and working in the resource sector early in my career, was recognizing that we need products, services, we need to manufacture things, etc. But where is that overlap between delivering those goods and services in a way that is a net benefit to people and the planet? And I would say more recently that kind of how can you use business to drive positive change? The other impact I want to make specifically is how do you use not just business activity, but investment activity, which also drives business activity, or it's one of the levers. So I'm very obviously particularly interested in how investment decisions, whether it's lending, like debt, equity, all the different types of financial, tools, how do you direct those to companies and projects that also drive social change? And I think the third impact that I want to make, and again tying it back to engineering, is I want to see this work done applying rigorous science and data. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of passion and a lot of very emotional and passionate desire to see change amongst many of us. But I think that putting an engineering lens on it, making sure that we understand the theory of change. If you do this, then this will happen, or not. Looking how to optimize, understanding optimization curves conceptually. So knowing how to find the optimal way to use the fewest resources to get the most positive change. So I'd say those are the three big areas for me.
Okay, fantastic. There's a lot of juicy, meaty stuff in that answer there, and the bringing together of all those skills, the passion and desire, and the use of business and investment, and the data, and the measurement, and sort of rigorous scientific data and process. Mina, I wonder how you would answer the same question. So if you were to drill down to the heart of it, what is the impact or the difference that you're trying to make?
Yeah, I mean, for us, Annie, like our clients are forgotten, financially excluded micro and small businesses. Nobody cares about them. Nobody is building technology to help them manage their business and achieve their dreams. So, we've in our vision, we want to enable these business owners to achieve their dreams. I'm not defining their dream for them. They have their own voice, and they have, the dignity to run their business. And we're there as a partner to help them grow that business so that they can do what they want to do with their life. And many of our clients want to send their kids to school. They want to not have to worry about, medical bills. They want to be able to buy a car or a motorcycle, or a TV, things that we all think about as well. So, for us, we're a business partner to them. And we're there to help them grow their business. And if they grow their business, then we succeed.
Amazing.
And so our incentives are very much aligned.
Okay. Thank you, Mina. It's really powerful what you're doing. It's incredible. I look forward to hearing more about it. So as we're kind of continuing to move into this, I wondered, for students on the call, they're sitting with questions of, what direction is the right direction for me? What's the best use of my skill? What are, I have options available. How do I choose? How do I know, is something going to happen that's going to help me figure that out? Or how do I kind of figure that out? So Jason, I'm wondering, question for you. How did you know that this was the right field for you? And what was the catalyst for pursuing social impact work?
Yeah, I certainly, even though feels like a very, very long time ago, certainly remember those feelings of trying to figure out exactly what I was going to do with these skills that I was acquiring in engineering school. What are the areas I could apply it? I was an MSc student. A lot of our coursework was focused on things that sometimes seem abstract, and nanotechnology, or starting to see applicability in things like sustainable development and biomaterials. But you're always asking that question about, where could this stuff be used? Where are we going to be able to apply the knowledge and the skills and the research that's being done by the incredible people in this school to actually make it out somewhere into the world? And I remember there was a couple of specific moments. The first was in school, and I think it was in the sustainable development course, where you started to see how the technologies that we were developing an expertise in were starting to make their way into the world, where we're seeing wind energy and solar energy being used in the developing world as the predominant forms of energy that leapfrogging traditional forms of energy like fossil fuels and oil and gas, or replacing things like wood burning stoves or diesel generators. And you started to see that there was applications for this skill set and for this knowledge to be applied in new and unique ways. And so, while we're sitting in engineering school thinking about some of the traditional paths we might take to the companies that recruit for PEY and for recruit out of graduation, there were opportunities as well for the Center for Global Engineering to share examples of where these unique skills could be applied in other areas. And so once I started to think that there was other places that an engineer could go, started to realize that social impact could be a very significant part of it. I did my PEY at BlackBerry, which gave me some very unique experience of how technological innovation, the smartphone and the apps that were being created actually made their way into the world, and the commercialization process that was critical to seeing that happen. And I came back from my PEY saying that the market-based approaches to international development were actually going to be another interesting way for me to apply my technical skills to actually see the innovations that my colleagues were working on make their way into the world and have an impact on people's lives. So I knew that it was the right field for me when, at that same time, all those years ago, I was thinking about technological innovation, market-based approaches and solutions coming together either through a business or investing lens. And the terminology of impact investing was starting to gain some traction all at the same time. And so for me, it felt right. It felt like there was a need for our skill set to be able to speak to both the technical side, the systems thinking, the problem solving side, and the need for market-based solutions, commercialization. Mina talked about the system change, and Sandra talked about investment and business playing a role, and all those pieces sort of came together for me at the same time in engineering school.
Okay. And Jason, if it's okay, I remember you feeling so clear that you wanted work that was really meaningful and was really going to impact people. And you exercised a lot of courage and took a lot of risks, went to New York, went over here, went to Colombia, did a lot of really interesting stuff as you were following that compass.
Yeah.
So we're a little, Sandra, I have a final question for you, and then we're going to move into some breakout groups. So this is kind of just have a moment here to hear your response to this question. But the question is, how has your engineering education benefited you in this field?
Yeah, I would say there's probably 3 or 4 things. So number one is definitely the whole problem solving, and I think Jason just alluded to this. Basically, if you have an hour to solve a problem, spend 58 minutes making sure you understand it before rushing to solution. I think that's drilled into you in engineering school. I think number 2 definitely is comfort with math and data, and make sure to follow the data and the information to know where to go with the things. I think 3 is curiosity. I think, sort of ability and interest in asking a lot of questions to get to the bottom of things. And I think a lot of engineers are naturally curious about how things work. And that's really a really important skill in figuring out how to solve social problems. And I think the 4th one was the other thing someone mentioned already, which is system thinking. There's that thing about if you can't solve a small problem, actually make it bigger and look at it from up here, because actually sometimes it'll make more sense. So yeah,
thank you. Hearing the 3 of you talk gives me a lot of faith that you are engineers leading change to build a better world. You're out there, you're doing it. You're bringing your engineering skills and experience to the table to really address complex problems. So that's fantastic. We are going to now switch gears for a few minutes. And we want to give everyone an opportunity to just connect. And this will be 5 minutes, but it's an opportunity to connect in a small group. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. So you'll be responsible to manage the time yourselves as a group. We'd like everyone to share their name. And what have you heard so far that has inspired you or sparked your curiosity? So we're going to send you off. We'll put the prompts in the chat, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Enjoy. So we're going to continue on here. And my next question is for you, Sandra. And this is, you've sort of talked about some of those engineering skills that you've used that have made this field really natural for you, the problem solving, the math and science, the data. What is a skill that you find you regularly draw on that you never thought you would need? What's a surprise when you went into this professional work?
Yeah, one of the things that I'll say that one of the things I draw on that I never thought I would need was the ability to explain things to my dad. So, you know, it's really, I think it's really interesting, sort of taking complicated ideas and taking them across silos. So things that make perfect sense to scientists and engineers, but you have to explain it to somebody who's, you know, very smart, but they're a finance or a business person, or, you know, they've been doing a lot of work on social change, and the ability to take, I mean, I guess two things: large amounts of information and distill it down to the one or two things that people really need to know is a skill I never realized how important that was. And it's one that takes constant honing. But that definitely taking things and condensing them and explaining them in a way that's approachable to people from very different backgrounds.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, I can imagine that sort of translation piece between all these different people. Okay, thanks, Sandra. That's a wonderful answer. I want to remind everyone to please mute yourself, just so that we can hear the panelists really clearly. That would be great after breakout groups. I know probably some folks may have unmuted, so just a reminder to come back to mute. All right, so my next question is for Jason and then for Mina. And that is, what has been the biggest surprise about social change and how it happens that you've discovered? So we'll start with you, Jason.
Great question. I think there's quite a few. I think the one that I'll really mention that might be all encompassing is that how many barriers there are, how much resistance there is. I think, you know, a lot of the time when we think about improving outcomes for people and for the planet, it just seems intuitive. It just seems like something that people would get on board with and you know, really support. But then, you know, even to Sandra's point before of, you know, there's some audiences that have traditional or views on how things happen or how things should be done. You know, the use of finance or the markets, for example, to have social, to be the primary driver of social change is an idea that is still met with quite a bit of resistance that I didn't anticipate would be as strong right now. So I think that's one big part of it, that just demonstrates how much more work there is to do.
Okay, thank you. Mina, what would you like to add to that? Your biggest surprise having been in this space?
I think there's like two that are equal. One is that this is lifelong work. So I think, you know, I remember being in university, you think you go spend a couple of years in Africa, you're going to make a difference. And it's not possible. So I've now been doing this for more than 10 years and I still feel like we've created so little impact. So that's kind of an unfortunate reality check, but once you come to terms with the fact that this is lifelong work and this is a career and it's not a hobby, I think your ability to dive deeper is much better. And then the other thing I would say is that there's a lot of people who work in this sector that will prioritize their self before the work, just like any other sector. So, you know, in my opinion, there is no difference between the quality of, you know, human that is working in the social impact space. And, you know, there's a lot of people who say, like, what about those, you know, Bay Street bankers, those people, they don't care. But you find out that there's very similar personalities in every sector. And so the types of people you meet may surprise you, who are actually doing this work.
Okay, so I'm hearing kind of from both of you a couple things that really stood out to me. One is that sense of like, wow, there's a lot of barriers, there's a lot of resistance, and it takes a lot to stay on, you know, to stay focused, and there's a lot of persistence required and creative ingenuity and imagination and determination to keep moving this. And Mina, the lifelong, that it's an investment. You don't necessarily get to see big change happen quickly. It's an ongoing, it's a lot of work to move towards that. I just want to, I hear that, and I almost want to ask you both what keeps you going, but maybe we'll see if we have time in the Q&A to come back to that, because yeah, I can appreciate it's not easy. Okay. So a final question for the panel, and that I'm going to start with you, Sandra, and then come to you, Jason. We wanted to ask a question that sort of relates to a lot of the things that we're seeing in society, but that we've also been very aware of for a long time. And the question is, because the current climate is highlighting the need for deliberate anti-racist practice in the workplace, can you talk about how the social impact field may be able to shift engineering culture to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in a meaningful way? It's a pretty big question, but I wonder, Sandra, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think, well, I think as Mina said, it's not something that will happen overnight. And I would also preface by saying, my answer relates to a lot of culture, not just engineering culture, but I think that, well, engineers are committed to the public good. So, we take an oath that what we do is for the public good. And we keep that in mind as we design and build things and run things. So I think we've always had that. And I think that, having a social impact lens, maybe having that in the engineering profession sort of starts to put a face to what is the public good and start to drill down into what are some of the specific social impacts of the work that you're doing? What are the specific, either inadvertently, which you should be aware of, but also, the work of the people on this call, which is to deliberately design our engineering work or any of our work to be deliberate about positive social change. I think to the extent that just having that social impact lens on engineering work helps the profession be much more conscious of the both intentional and unintentional consequences of things that we do when we do conventional engineering. I also think that that applies to diversity and racism. Again, are you, like, in terms of hiring practices, in terms of what is the social impact you're making through the company that you're running, through the thing that you're constructing, through the way that you're designing your impact assessments, etc. So I think that that lens is useful for every profession, hopefully to some extent, and particularly I can see it in engineering as an extension of what we already understand to be our obligation to the public.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. It's a very full, rich answer. Jason, I'm going to pass it over to you to answer the same question.
Yeah, it's a tough answer to follow, Sandra. There's so much of what you said, that I so strongly and passionately agree with, and I'm recognizing it's not just an engineering culture problem. This is a humanity, a society, a systems problem. And I think I'll probably just piggyback on a couple of the things that you said, which I think is kind of driving home the point of measuring impact and managing impact. Is you want to start seeing that people are intentional about this based on how they set their goals around alleviating the issues. So are there metrics embedded into an engineering project or the design of a solution that are trying to capture whether or not you're addressing issues of inequality and racism? The way that a company is structured, as Sandra alluded to it, what is the composition of your executive team, your board, the people that are making decisions, the people that are designing the solutions that are ultimately going to impact everyone? Are these factors considered? So to me, I think engineers are actually uniquely positioned to play a major role in this, because that's how we're trained to think. we're trained to think in systems. We're trained to think in data and measurability, and using that to inform improvement and performance. And so I think the culture of engineering can really adapt some of the things that we've talked about that we learn in is it APS 101, 100, I don't remember it, of human factors, human design thinking. You know, who are the humans that we're thinking about? What are the metrics, the functions, the objectives, the constraints that we're considering? How do we identify whether or not we're trying to alleviate some of these issues that are really prevalent in everything that we do? So yeah.
All right, so amazing. And I'm hearing from Sandra that social impact lens and how important it is, even as it then moves into the kinds of metrics that get created to measure the effectiveness of a project. So the social impact lens for all of us is so essential as but certainly in the context of engineering. Thank you. So I'm conscious of our time, and we wanted to give everyone on this call a chance to take what you're hearing and sort of connect it to your own life, where you are right now, how you are seeing your future. So this is that point where we'd love you to pull out your paper and pen. This will be just a few minutes, and you certainly don't need to answer these questions, you know, fully. You can bring these questions with you through the day and spend some time with them. But really what we want to encourage you to reflect on, and we'll just have a few minutes, probably 3, we'll just be in silence. You can turn your video off or you can turn all of our videos off if you need to get a little bit of sense of space. But a chance to reflect on yourself, and what is the impact when you think about your engineering degree? What is the impact that you hope to make with your engineering degree? What do you know so far about that? And how might you begin to have that impact today, this week? We were thinking about, sometimes we feel like we have to wait till we graduate, but what might be a couple steps that you could take right now, this week, that would support you in that? So we're just going to give you a few minutes of quiet reflection time. Good luck with that.
Thank you. I'm afraid we won't be able to get to all the questions here, but we'll do our best to go through a few of them. And maybe an interesting one to start with, there are a lot of kind of questions around how you might get involved with social impact, how you might gain some practical experience. So a question to the panelists around ideas, recommendations, and advice for getting into this kind of line of work, and in particular, any kind of opportunities or companies that might be interesting as a starting point.
Is there any one of you who has a burning desire to answer that question?
I guess I can. Go ahead.
Well, you know what, I just was going to say that it really depends, because I would like to believe you can make a social impact in a lot of different fields and in a lot of different areas. So I think it depends. I think the answer is it depends what kind of social impact work you want to do. You know, well, I started my career as an environmental scientist working in a resource company, and I actually feel I had a pretty big impact. It was environmental mostly, but then consulting, environmental impact assessment work, where there's social and environmental factors considered for all large projects. So consulting, corporations, you know, finance and banking, responsible investment, international development. There are a lot of different places, and there's a lot of different kind of fields of practice where you can apply a passion for social change or environmental change towards it. So that's the good news. So I'd be interested to hear what the other panelists think about that.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar around casting the net a little bit wider now. I think fortunately there's more opportunity these days to work in something that doesn't necessarily have to be at a nonprofit solving a specific issue. It could be something related or something, you know, meant to support a social or environmental objective. And to Sandra's point, I think a lot of corporates, a lot of traditional jobs that might be available to engineering students now have the opportunity to tie in a social impact objective to some of that work, or at least participate in the organization's social impact initiatives, or you know, you can even be the one to start some of those initiatives within the place that you choose to go to. So it doesn't necessarily have to be defined by the title and the company. There's so many other ways that you can try to drive your own impact in the role that you choose to have.
Okay, awesome. Milan, next question.
So I'm going to take a stab at blending a couple here again. There's a theme around kind of social impact in the context of politics that comes up often. And maybe a question here, considering that policies and politicians often have a lot of influence on social impact, a question for the panel is, how can engineers be involved in kind of creating social change with these additional external circumstances in place? And is that, maybe a follow-up question on that is, why social impact over political impact? Is there anyone who would like to start with that big, meaty question?
I have a comment about that, actually, and it's just because somebody just laid things out to me this way, and I loved it. If you want to see social change, you know, and we were talking about it in the context of the Black Lives Matter stuff that's going on, and I brought up the Occupy Wall Street stuff that kind of went nowhere eventually. And we agreed that if you want to see social change, you need to have 3 levers that are aggressively pursued, and in the courtrooms, and that includes politics, but in the law, on the streets, and in the boardroom. And if you only push on one of those, if you're just marching, like, nothing's going to change in the long run. It has to be in the boardroom, in the courtroom, and on the streets. So I think that I'll just put that out there, that there's no question that engineers getting involved in policy and politics is a really good way to do it. But it's absolutely, you need that, and it's one of the levers. Obviously, those 3 are a simplification, but you should consider that you could play in any of those 3.
Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to frame it, Sandra. I'm going to keep that in mind in future conversations about this. And then I think, you know, I think what immediately comes to mind about the politics is being a political person, is being someone that has to have you know, a platform to discuss ideas that, you know, resonate with one party or another. But you know, engineers play a significant role in shaping policy, in doing the research, creating the evidence, being the expert practitioners that are relied on to figure out what the solutions are and help them move through legislation that can certainly be an asset, and you know, getting involved in the actual legislative process if that's something that, you know, is uniquely suited to your skill set. So I think it would be great to see more engineers play that role and be in a political role, and but there's ways that we can also contribute to that with, you know, with the other roles that we're currently already playing.
Okay.
I don't know if Mina wanted to follow on that, or if we can move ahead with maybe one more question here.
I'm gonna stay quiet on the political.
Okay, let's move forward.
There's one more interesting question that came up that ties a few of the themes that we talked about today, including kind of this notion of needing to measure impact, this idea of being kind of data informed and following the information, but also linking into some of the implicit biases and societal structures that we see. So this was a question originally for Sandra, but I think it would be amazing to hear from everybody. How do you address some of the implicit biases that might exist in the data that you're working with, or in the information that you're receiving that is ultimately informing your decision making? And who do you draw on to kind of test your assumptions and check in with? Yeah, we can start with Sandra and then maybe go through Mina and Jason as well.
Yeah, I actually think that that's a really great question. And I think one of the important things is to make sure that you have a number of different sources of data. It's kind of like not only reading, you know, or getting the news from the news channel that is agrees with you the most. You want to also occasionally watch Fox News just to see what what the heck they're saying. But yeah, so I think it's really a really valid point. You have to be looking for data and validation across a number of different sources, and recognizing the maybe unintentional biases in the data and information. And again, be willing to ask a lot of questions about where the data came from, how it was gathered, et cetera, and understand the sources of it. Really important point, important question. Thanks.
Yeah, this is a very interesting question for me, because we work in an environment in Uganda where we have practically no data about anything. So everything we do involves creating data sets from scratch, which allows us to design it properly in quotation marks, from the beginning, making sure that the way we aggregate this data and collect it, and store it and keep it safe, and explain to people who are giving us data, their rights and their privacy rights with that data, and how the data will be used. We're able to do all of that, from the beginning, and so it's hard for me to, like, when I think about, do we have any biases in the data, or in the sources of the data, what are the biases? I think it's a little bit more challenging for me to think about that, because we are the ones who created the data sets. I'd love for someone else to look at our data sets and tell us, what blind spots we have. But hopefully so far we've managed to keep things proper.
Okay. Jason, any final word on this question?
I think that was well covered.
Okay. What I might do, we literally have 2 minutes, and this has been such a multi-layered, textured conversation that we've had. I'm so thankful to all of you. There's been such rich threads and themes that have come out here around impact on people and planet and measurement. And Sandra, what you said about those 3 levels of where we are all enacting change and how to make it all kind of coordinate together, the courtroom, the boardroom, the streets. We've talked about social justice and equity. We've talked about blind spots and barriers. We've talked about the resistance to social change. We've talked about systems. We've talked about the capacity to make change in any kind of organization and at any stage of your career, that is available to you to start working towards as early as today, given the journal prompt that we offered. And we talked about the importance of that social impact lens and how that goes into decision making and even the creation of criteria, objectives that are then measured. So I just really want to thank you. I wonder if in our final moments here, if each of you in 30 seconds have a piece of advice that you'd like to offer to the students on this call as they move towards their professional future. One piece of advice, 30 seconds. What might that be? And Mina, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Put me on the spot here, but I think the one piece of advice is, don't be afraid of discomfort. I think it's, when you're 19 years old, you can do anything and not fail, really. So just go be uncomfortable all the time.
Amazing. Thank you. Jason.
Yeah, I think I would say give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance to learn, to continue to learn, to fail, to make mistakes, and rebound from it. And to Mina's point, when you're 19, 20, 21, the risks are a little bit lower, so you can try and experiment with things and figure out what your right path is in an iterative way. You don't have to have it all figured out right at the beginning.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Sandra.
I sense a theme here, so I would say the same. My advice is be willing to try things. I always thought if you can see yourself doing it for 18 months to 2 years, especially if we're talking about work, even though you weren't thinking you wanted to do it, give it a whirl. And I always tell people who are, young people, that nothing is irreversible. except, and this is what I tell my children, except children and bad tattoos. So.
Very wise advice there. Okay. So in closing, we want to thank everyone for being with us today. And we also want to let you know about the next session coming up in 2 weeks' time. The next session will be looking at a number of engineering alum who are coming back to tell us about their work in the energy field. So that will be really interesting. We have 3 amazing panelists joining us for that conversation of what's it like, what are they doing, and what's it like in a space where energy, climate, all kinds of things are happening right now. So we'll hear from them next time. So thank you all for being with us today. Thank you to our amazing panelists. And we will see you next time. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye.
Riley.
Thanks for inviting us.